I'm Natalie Harper, and I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until I walked into my childhood home and found my sister Brooklyn spinning in front of our grandmother's antique mirror, wearing the ivory silk gown I'd spent 2 years saving for. The beaded bodice caught the afternoon light streaming through the lace curtains, and for a moment she looked radiant, beautiful, guilty. What she didn't know was that 4 hours earlier I had already walked down a different aisle in a simple courthouse ceremony, wearing a $20 sundress, and married the man she thought was still hers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Saturday in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, except for the knot of anticipation twisting in my stomach. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at dawn, brushing my teeth with mechanical precision while my mind raced through the day ahead. The wedding was supposed to be next weekend. My wedding. Brooklyn was supposed to be my maid of honor, standing beside me in the dusty rose dress we'd picked out together at the bridal boutique in Lancaster 3 months ago. Instead, I was about to marry Derek Matthews in secret at the courthouse, while my family prepared for what they believed would be my marriage to Connor Walsh. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months I'd been planning the perfect wedding to the wrong man, while the right man waited patiently in the wings, watching me stumble through an engagement that felt more like a performance than a promise. Derek had been Connor's best friend since college, the quiet one who listened while Connor dominated every conversation, the steady presence who remembered my coffee order while Connor forgot my middle name. When Connor proposed on Christmas Eve in front of my entire family, I said yes because it felt like the natural progression of things. We'd been dating for 3 years. Everyone expected it. Brooklyn had been dropping hints for months about how perfect we looked together, how our children would be gorgeous, how she couldn't wait to be an aunt. What I didn't know then was that Brooklyn had been saying the same things to Connor about herself. The discovery came accidentally, as most devastating truths do. 2 weeks ago, I'd left work early with a migraine and driven to Connor's apartment to pick up the wedding favors we'd stored there. His spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by his door, the same place it had been for 2 years. I let myself in quietly, planning to grab the boxes and leave a note. Instead, I found Brooklyn curled against Connor's chest on his leather sofa, both of them half-dressed and sound asleep. Empty wine glasses sat on the coffee table next to my wedding planning binder, the pages scattered as if they'd been flipping through them together. On the kitchen counter, I spotted Brooklyn's car keys next to a takeout container from Romano's, the Italian place where Connor had proposed to me. I stood frozen in his living room for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The afternoon sun slanted through his blinds, casting prison bar shadows across their intertwined body. Brooklyn's dark hair spilled across Connor's chest, and his arm wrapped around her protectively, the same way he used to hold me during movies. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was relief. The weight I'd been carrying for months, the nagging feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with my engagement, suddenly made sense. I wasn't broken or incapable of love, I was just in love with the wrong person, engaged to someone who was apparently in love with my sister. I left without waking them, carefully locking the door behind me. But instead of going home to cry or confront them immediately, I drove to the small coffee shop on Main Street, where Derek worked as a freelance graphic designer most afternoons. I found him at his usual corner table, laptop open, dark hair falling into his eyes as he concentrated on whatever project had captured his attention. "Natalie?" He looked up when I slid into the chair across from him, concern immediately creasing his features. "You look pale, everything okay?" Derek had always been able to read me better than Connor ever could. Where Connor would launch into solutions without understanding the problem, Derek would simply wait, creating space for me to find my own words. "I just caught Connor and Brooklyn together," I said quietly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Derek's laptop screen went dark as he closed it slowly, his full attention shifting to me. "Together how?" Sleeping on his couch, half naked, with my wedding planning materials scattered around them like confetti. For a long moment, Derek didn't say anything. He reached across the table and took my hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles across my knuckles. His touch was warm and familiar and safe in a way that Connor's never had been. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You didn't deserve that." "The weird part is, I think I'm relieved," I admitted. "Does that make me a terrible person?" Derek smiled sadly. "It makes you honest. You've been trying to convince yourself you're happy for months. I've watched you do it. Have I been that obvious? Only to someone who pays attention." We sat in comfortable silence while the coffee shop bustled around us. Outside the window, Millbrook continued its Saturday routine, Miss Patterson walked her ancient golden retriever past the flower shop. The Murphy twins rode their bikes in lazy circles around the fountain in the town square. Everything looked normal, peaceful, unchanged, while my entire world quietly rearranged itself. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said eventually. I nodded. If Connor wasn't in the picture, if Brooklyn wasn't in the picture, if none of this mess existed, what would you want? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. But sitting there, holding hands with the man who had been quietly supporting me through every wedding planning crisis, every family dinner where Connor dominated the conversation, every moment when I felt invisible in my own relationship, the answer came easily. "You," I said. "I'd want." Derek's face transformed, hope and relief and something deeper flooding his expression. "Even if it means everything gets complicated." Everything's already complicated. At least this way it's complicated with someone who actually sees me. That had been 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks of secret conversations, stolen moments, and careful planning. Derek and I had decided not to confront Connor and Brooklyn immediately. Instead, we wanted to understand our own feelings first, to make sure we weren't just rebounding into each other's arms out of hurt and convenience. But the more time we spent together, the more certain I became. Derek knew how I liked my eggs cooked. He remembered that I was allergic to shellfish. He listened when I talked about my job at the veterinary clinic, without immediately trying to fix every problem I mentioned. When I worried about disappointing my parents by calling off the wedding, he held me while I cried instead of telling me what I should do. With Derek, I felt like myself. With Connor, I'd always felt like I was trying to become someone worthy of his attention. The plan we'd developed was admittedly dramatic, but it felt right. Let Connor and Brooklyn think they were getting away with their secret affair. Let them believe the wedding was still happening as scheduled. Meanwhile, Derek and I would quietly marry at the courthouse, making our relationship legal before revealing the truth. When the time came to expose their betrayal, I'd do it from a position of strength rather than victimhood. So here I was, standing in my bathroom at 6 in the morning, preparing to marry the love of my life, while my family slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that their perfect wedding plans were about to implode. I chose a simple yellow sundress from my closet, something cheerful and hopeful that made me feel confident. Derek had picked it out during one of our secret shopping trips to Lancaster, insisting that I looked radiant in bright color. Connor had always preferred me in muted tones, claiming they were more sophisticated. Another red flag I'd ignored. The drive to Lancaster took 40 minutes, long enough for my nerves to settle into determined calm. Derek was waiting for me in the courthouse parking lot, leaning against his Honda Civic in dark jeans, and a button-down shirt that brought out the green in his eyes. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with the kind of genuine smile that made my heart skip. "You sure about this?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The ceremony itself was simple and perfect. Judge Catherine Mills, a kind woman in her 60s who had known Derek's family for years, performed the service in her chambers with Marcus Thompson and Lily Foster serving as our witnesses. Derek had written his own vows, words about partnership and respect, and choosing each other every day that made me cry happy tears. When he slipped the simple gold band onto my finger, it felt like coming home. "You may kiss your bride," Judge Mills announced with a warm smile. Derek's kiss was soft and sure and full of promise. When we broke apart, I felt transformed. Not because marriage had magically changed me, but because I had finally chosen the path that felt authentically mine. "Mrs. Matthews," Derek whispered against my ear, and I laughed with pure joy. We celebrated with lunch at a small cafe downtown, sharing a piece of strawberry cake and making plans for how we'd reveal our marriage to our families. Derek wanted to tell his parents immediately, but I asked him to wait until after I dealt with the situation at home. This was my mess to clean up, my family to face. "Are you going to confront them today?" Derek asked as we walked back to our cars. "I'm going to see what's happening first, get the full picture, then I'll decide how to handle it. You don't have to do this alone, you know. I'm your husband now. We're a team." The word husband sent a thrill through me. I know, but I need to face Brooklyn and my parents on my own terms. They've been making decisions about my life without including me. Time to return the favor. Derek kissed me goodbye in the courthouse parking lot, his hands gentle on my face. "Call me if you need anything. I'll be at home," officially changing my emergency contacts, and trying not to pace a hole in my floor. "I love you, Mr. Matthews. I love you too, Mrs. Matthews. Go show them what strength looks like." The drive back to Millbrook gave me time to think about how I wanted to handle the confrontation. I could storm in and accuse them immediately, but that would put them on the defensive. They'd deny everything, claim I was misunderstanding, make me feel crazy for trusting my own eyes. Instead, I decided to gather more evidence, to understand the full scope of their betrayal before revealing what I knew. My family's Victorian house on Maple Street looked exactly the same as always when I pulled into the driveway. The white picket fence needed a fresh coat of paint, and my mother's rose bushes were blooming in wild profusion along the front porch. Everything appeared normal, domestic, peaceful, but I knew now that appearances could be devastatingly deceptive. I let myself in through the front door, calling out a casual greeting. No response came from the living room, but I could hear movement upstairs and the sound of my mother's voice coming from the kitchen. "Natalie, is that?" Mom called. Perfect timing. Brooklyn just brought over some ideas for the reception centerpieces. I found my mother, Patricia Harper, standing at the kitchen island surrounded by bridal magazines and fabric samples. At 62, she was still beautiful in the understated way of women who had never needed to try too hard. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore the kind of casual elegance that came from decades of hosting church committee meetings and charity luncheons.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Where's Brooklyn?" I asked, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Upstairs in your room, I think." She wanted to double-check something about the dress alterations. My blood ran cold. What dress alterations? Mom looked confused. "For her maid of honor dress, dear. Although she was asking some odd questions about your gown too. Something about the bustling for dancing." The bustling? Brooklyn had been asking about how to bustle my wedding dress for dancing. Why would she need to know that unless she planned to wear it herself? "I'll go check on her," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, each step echoing in the quiet house. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear Brooklyn humming inside. I pushed it open slowly, and there she was. My sister stood in front of the full-length mirror wearing my wedding dress, the one I'd bought with money from my savings account, the one that had been hanging in my closet for 2 months waiting for next weekend. The ivory silk flowed around her like liquid moonlight, and the delicate beadwork on the bodice caught the afternoon sun streaming through my bedroom window. Brooklyn looked beautiful. She also looked guilty as hell. "Oh," she gasped, spinning around when she heard me enter. "Natalie, I wanted to see," the seamstress said. But her excuses trailed off as she saw my expression. I wasn't angry yet. I was curious, analytical, gathering data like a scientist observing an experiment. "It fits you perfectly," I said calmly, stepping further into the room. Brooklyn's face flushed red. "I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have put it on. I was just curious about the alterations, and it was hanging right there. And how long have you been planning to wear it?" The question hung in the air between us like a blur. Brooklyn's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her hands fluttering nervously at the dress's fabric. "What do you mean?" she finally managed. "I mean, how long have you and Connor been planning for you to wear my wedding dress to marry him instead of me?" Brooklyn's face went white. "Natalie, I don't know what you're talking about. I saw you 2 weeks ago, at his apartment, sleeping together." The lie came apart in her eyes like tissue paper in rain. Her shoulders sagged, and she sank onto my childhood bed, the wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "How was it supposed to happen? We were going to tell you, after the wedding was called off, we thought. We hoped you'd realize on your own that you weren't right for each other." I sat down in my desk chair, the same one I'd done homework in throughout high school. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to get an education in betrayal in the same spot where I'd learned algebra. "So you decided to help me realize it by sleeping with my fiancé?" "It wasn't like that. Connor and we've always had a connection, even before you started dating him, but he chose you, and I respected that. I stepped aside, until," Brooklyn's voice was barely audible, "until he told me he was having second thoughts about the wedding. He said he felt trapped, like he was making a mistake. We talked about it, and one thing led to another." "How many times?" "What? How many times have you slept with him? How long has this been going on?" Brooklyn wrapped her arms around herself, the wedding dress making her look like a guilty angel. 3 months. 3 months. My entire engagement party planning, dress fittings, venue bookings, invitation address, all of it had been happening, while my sister and my fiancé conducted their secret affair behind my back. "Did Mom and Dad know?" "God, no. We've been so careful. The only reason you caught us that day was because we thought you were working late." I nodded slowly, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. That's why Connor's been so distant lately, why he's been finding excuses not to spend time with me. Natalie, please understand, we never meant to hurt you. We were trying to find a way to handle this that wouldn't destroy the family. By letting me plan and pay for a wedding to a man who's in love with someone else. We hoped you'd call it off yourself. Connor said you seemed unhappy too. The cruel irony was that Connor had been right. I had been unhappy, just not for the reasons he assumed. So what was the plan, Brooklyn? Let me walk down the aisle next weekend, and then object when the minister asks if anyone has a reason we shouldn't be married. Connor was going to talk to you. This week, he was going to call off the wedding, and then wait a respectable amount of time before announcing that you two had fallen in love during my heartbreak. Brooklyn started crying, mascara running down her cheeks in dark tracks. I know how it sounds. I know we handled this terribly. But Natalie, I've loved him since the day you brought him home for dinner. Then why didn't you say something 3 years ago? Because he chose you. Because I'm your sister, and I wanted you to be happy. But you didn't want me to be happy enough to stop sleeping with my fiancé. Brooklyn had no answer for that. We sat in silence for several minutes, her sniffling quietly while I processed the full scope of their betrayal. The wedding dress looked obscene on her now, a costume for a play I hadn't auditioned for. Take it off, I said finally. What? Take off my wedding dress. You're not going to need it. Brooklyn stood shakily and turned her back to me. Can you help me with the buttons? I stood and moved behind her, my fingers working the delicate pearl buttons that ran from her neck to her waist. As I unfastened each one, I thought about Derek and our simple courthouse ceremony, about the vows we'd exchanged and the life we were going to build together. Natalie, Brooklyn said softly, what are you going to do? The dress came loose, and she held it against her chest to keep it from falling. I stepped back, looking at my sister in my childhood bedroom, wearing my wedding dress, asking me to forgive her for betraying me in the worst possible way. I'm going to get married next weekend, I said calmly. Brooklyn's face flooded with relief. Oh, thank God. I was so afraid you'd cancel everything. We can fix this, Natalie. Connor will call off whatever he was planning to say, and you two can work through this. Couples therapy maybe. Lots of people get past infidelity. I'm not marrying Connor. Brooklyn froze. What do you mean? I mean I'm not marrying Connor Walsh next weekend. I'm already married. The wedding dress slipped from Brooklyn's hands and fell to the floor in a puddle of silk and broken dreams. She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Already married to who? Derek Matthews. We got married this morning at the courthouse in Lancaster. Brooklyn sat down hard on my bed, her face cycling through confusion, shock and something that looked like panic. Derek? Connor's best friend Derek. My husband Derek. Yes, but how? When? Why didn't you tell anyone? I looked down at her sitting there in her slip surrounded by the ruins of her perfect plan, and felt a wave of something that wasn't quite pity but wasn't satisfaction either. It was clarity, because some things are too important to share with people who don't have your best interests at heart. From downstairs I could hear my mother calling our names, probably wondering what was taking so long. Soon she'd come upstairs to check on us. Soon I'd have to explain to my parents that their perfect wedding plans were about to become a very public scandal. But first I had some phone calls to make. Get dressed, Brooklyn, I said walking toward my bedroom door. We're going to have a family meeting. Natalie, wait, please, we can work this out. Connor doesn't have to know you know about us. You can still have your wedding. I paused at the doorway and looked back at her one last time. You're right, I am having my wedding next weekend. Just not with the groom you expected. As I walked downstairs to call Derek and tell him it was time to let our families know about our marriage, I heard Brooklyn frantically trying to get out of my wedding dress. The sound of silk rustling and hangers clattering seemed to follow me down the hallway like an accusation. But I wasn't the one who should feel guilty. The phone in my hand felt heavier than it should have as I dialed Derek's number from the kitchen. My mother still bustling around with wedding magazines spread across every available surface. Through the ceiling I could hear Brooklyn's footsteps pacing back and forth in my bedroom, probably trying to figure out how to salvage her carefully constructed deception. Hey beautiful, Derek's voice came through warm and steady, the same tone that had been anchoring me for weeks. How did it go? She was wearing my dress, I said quietly, stepping out onto the back porch where the late afternoon breeze carried the scent of my mother's jasmine vine. Actually wearing it, Derek, like she was practicing for her own wedding day. The pause on his end stretched just long enough for me to imagine his jaw tightening, that protective instinct he tried so hard to keep in check finally surfacing. What did you say to her? I told her I knew about the affair, and I told her we're married. How did she take? I watched a cardinal land on the fence post near my mother's vegetable garden, its red feathers brilliant against the white painted wood. Even nature seemed more vibrant today, as if my newfound clarity had sharpened everything around me. Like someone whose master plan just exploded in her face. Good, Derek said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. What's next? Family meeting. Mom and Dad need to know what's been happening under their roof. Then we call Connor and give him the news before someone else does. Do you want me there? The offer was tempting. Derek's presence always made me feel stronger, more centered, but this was something I needed to handle on my own terms, from my own position of power. Not yet. Let me handle the initial fallout first. Then we can plan how to tell everyone else. I'm proud of you, you know that. The simple words hit me harder than they should have. When was the last time Connor had said he was proud of me? When had he ever looked at me the way Derek did, like I was capable of moving mountains? I love you too, husband. I love you too, wife. Call me tonight. Try and stop me. I ended the call and stood on the porch for another moment, gathering my strength. Inside I could hear my mother calling for Brooklyn to come help with something, her voice carrying the cheerful expectation of a woman who believed her family was perfect. In a few minutes, that illusion would shatter completely. When I walked back into the kitchen, Mom had arranged herself at the island with a selection of centerpiece options spread before her like a general planning a campaign. White roses, ivory peonies, dusty rose hydrangeas, all nestled in various crystal and silver containers that had belonged to her mother and grandmother before her. There you are, sweetheart, she said without looking up from her arrangements. I was thinking we should go with the peonies for the main tables and save the roses for the cake table. What do you think? Looking at her there, surrounded by wedding preparations for a celebration that would never happen, I felt a stab of genuine regret, not for the choices I'd made, but for the disappointment I was about to cause. Patricia Harper had been planning this wedding almost as eagerly as she thought I had been. In her mind, this was the culmination of everything she'd hoped for her daughters. A beautiful ceremony, a handsome son-in-law, grandchildren who would carry on the family name. Mom, we need to talk. Is Dad home? Something in my tone made her look up sharply. He's in his study, working on some client files. Natalie, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? Before I could answer, Brooklyn appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in jeans and a sweater, but looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she kept glancing between me and our mother as if waiting for an explosion. Perfect timing, I said. Brooklyn, can you get Dad? We need to have a family discussion. About what? Mom asked, but Brooklyn was already disappearing down the hallway toward Dad's study, moving with the urgency of someone who wanted to get the inevitable over with. I took a seat across from my mother, pushing aside a crystal vase filled with white roses. The flowers were beautiful, perfect for a wedding that would never happen. About some changes to next weekend's plans, Mom's face immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. What kind of changes? If it's about the catering, I can call Vanessa. She said there might be flexibility with the menu if we needed to accommodate any last-minute dietary restrictions. It's not about the catering. Brooklyn returned with our father, Robert Harper, following behind her with the distracted air of a man pulled away from something important. At 65, he still carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent 40 years solving other people's legal problems. But there was something uncertain in his expression as he took in the tension radiating from his daughters. "What's this about, girls?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Mom and reaching automatically for her hand. After 38 years of marriage, they still moved like a unit, finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's needs. It made what I was about to tell them even more difficult. "There's not going to be a wedding next weekend," I said simply. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of confusion across both my parents' faces. Mom's hand went to her throat, fingers finding the pearl necklace she wore for important occasions. "What do you mean?" Dad asked, his lawyer's training kicking in as he leaned forward slightly. "Did you and Connor have a fight? These things happen, sweetheart. Pre-wedding jitters are completely normal." "It's not pre-wedding jitters. Connor and I are not getting married because Connor is in love with Brooklyn." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents' faces as they processed the information, confusion giving way to shock, giving way to the kind of slow-burning realization that changes everything. Mom turned to look at Brooklyn, who had gone pale as milk and was staring at the floor like she might find escape routes mapped in the tile pattern. "Brooklyn? Is this true?" "Mom, I can explain. Is it true? Dad's voice had taken on the sharp edge he used in courtrooms when witnesses tried to evade direct questions. Brooklyn's shoulders sagged in defeat. Yes, the single word seemed to echo in the kitchen, bouncing off the cheerful yellow walls and settling into every corner like dust. Mom's hand tightened on Dad's, and I watched something break behind her eyes. How long? She asked, quietly. 3 months, Brooklyn whispered. 3 months. Mom repeated the words like she was testing their weight. You've been involved with your sister's fiancé for 3 months. We didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. Dad ran a hand through his graying hair, the same gesture he'd used when Brooklyn and I were children and had broken something valuable. Brooklyn, what were you thinking? I was thinking that Connor and Natalie weren't right for each other. Brooklyn's voice cracked as she finally looked up from the floor. I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, I deserve to be happy too, at your sister's expense. Mom's voice was deadly quiet. Natalie doesn't love him. Not real. She's been going through the motions for months, and everyone can see it except her. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. 6 months ago it might have sent me spiraling into self-doubt and recrimination. 6 hours ago it might have made me question everything. But sitting there as Derek's wife, secure in the knowledge of what real love felt like, Brooklyn's words bounced off me like rain on a window. You're right, I said calmly. I don't love Connor. I never did, not the way I should have. Brooklyn's mouth fell open. She'd clearly expected denial, tears, some dramatic reaction that would shift the focus away from her own betrayal. But that doesn't excuse what you did, I continued. If you thought I was making a mistake, you should have talked to me. Instead, you decided to seduce my fiancé and plan some elaborate scheme to steal my wedding day. We weren't going to steal your wedding day, Brooklyn protested. Connor was going to break up with you this week. We were going to wait until after you'd had time to process everything. And then, eventually, we thought maybe we could be together. Eventually, I let the word hang there. How long is eventually, Brooklyn? A month? 6 months? A year? How long were you planning to let me think I was the problem? How long were you going to let me believe I was unlovable? Mom made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. When I looked at her, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Mom? I keep thinking about the dress fittings, she said brokenly. All those hours we spent at the bridal shop, talking about your future, planning every detail, and the whole time, Brooklyn. Dad's jaw was tight with the kind of controlled anger I'd only seen a few times in my life. Usually when someone had threatened his family. Brooklyn, I want you to pack your things and stay somewhere else tonight. Your mother and I need time to process this. Daddy, please. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's exactly as bad as it sounds. His voice was ice cold. You betrayed your sister in the worst possible way. You let us spend thousands of dollars on a wedding that was never going to happen. You let your mother exhaust herself with planning and preparation while you conducted an affair behind all our backs. The money, Mom whispered suddenly. Oh God, the deposits, the venue, the caterer, the flowers. Natalie, we'll lose everything. Actually, I said carefully. About that, I have something else to tell you. Both parents turned to look at me with identical expressions of dread, as if they couldn't possibly absorb any more revelations. I got married this morning. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Dad's face went completely blank, while Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Married to who? Dad asked faintly. Derek Matthews. Derek. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Connor's Derek. My Derek now. But how? When did this? I mean, you were engaged to Connor yesterday. I found out about Connor and Brooklyn's affair 2 weeks ago. Derek and I have been talking, and we realized we had feelings for each other. This morning we went to the courthouse in Lancaster, and had a small ceremony. Brooklyn, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly came alive. You knew for 2 weeks? You've known this whole time and you didn't say anything. I wanted to see how far you'd take it. I wanted to understand exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. So you let us dig our own graves, Brooklyn said bitterly. I let you make your own choice, just like you let me make mine when you decided not to tell me about your affair. Dad cleared his throat, his legal mind obviously trying to process the logistics. Natalie, are you telling me that while we've been planning your wedding to Connor Walsh, you've been secretly married to Derek Matthews? Yes. And Brooklyn has been having an affair with Connor? Yes. And Connor doesn't know about any of this? Not yet. Dad leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. This is like something out of a soap opera. It's worse than a soap opera, Mom said, her voice gaining strength as anger began to replace shock. It's my family falling apart right in front of my eyes. She stood up abruptly, sweeping the wedding magazines off the counter and into the trash can with violent motions. Crystal vases followed, the sound of breaking glass punctuating her movements. 37 years, she said, her voice rising with each word. 37 years I've been a mother, and I thought I knew my daughters. I thought I raised you to be honest, loyal, decent human beings. Mom, please, Brooklyn started. Don't. Mom's voice cut across the kitchen like a blade. Just don't. I can't look at either of you right now. She stormed out of the kitchen, her footsteps echoing up the stairs. A moment later, we heard her bedroom door slam shut. The three of us sat in silence for several minutes, surrounded by the debris of Mom's wedding preparations. Dad finally spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Brooklyn, I meant what I said. I want you out of this house tonight. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my concern right now. Call a friend, get a hotel room, figure it out. You're an adult who made adult choices. Deal with the adult consequences. Brooklyn's face crumpled. Daddy, I'm still your daughter. Yes, you are, and I still love you. But I don't like you very much right now, and I don't trust you in this house around your sister. The words hit Brooklyn like a physical blow. She looked at me with something that might have been desperation. Natalie, tell them you understand why I did it. Tell them you're happy with Derek. I am happy with Derek, but I'm not going to minimize what you did to get here. I gave you the perfect out. If I hadn't been with Connor, you'd still be engaged to someone you don't love. If you'd talked to me instead of betraying me, we could have figured this out without destroying the family. Brooklyn stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her cycling through anger, hurt, and finally a kind of desperate calculation. Fine, you want to make me the villain. Go ahead. But Connor loves me, Natalie. He chose me. That has to count for something. Does he know you told him about us? Dad asked quietly. Brooklyn's silence was answer enough. So Connor thinks he's still engaged to Natalie. Natalie is secretly married to Derek, and you're planning to show up at the wedding venue next weekend and announce that you're taking her place. We were going to handle it more delicately than that. There's no delicate way to handle this kind of betrayal, Brooklyn. I watched my sister realize that her fairy tale ending wasn't going to materialize the way she'd imagined. Whatever fantasy she'd constructed about Connor leaving me for her, about their love conquering all obstacles, was crumbling in real time. I need to call him, she said suddenly. I need to tell Connor what happened before someone else does. Good idea, I said. While you're at it, you might want to mention that the wedding he thinks he's avoiding is actually a wedding he was never going to have anyway. Brooklyn pulled out her phone with shaking hands, but before she could dial, the front door opened and we heard Connor's voice calling out, "Hello, Mrs. Harper?" The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The three of us froze. Connor's unexpected arrival had just accelerated our timeline considerably. In the kitchen, "Connor," Dad called, his voice carefully neutral. Connor appeared in the doorway looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. He glanced around the room, taking in the broken glass, the scattered magazines, and the tension that was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Is everything okay?" I tried calling Brooklyn, but she didn't answer, and I thought maybe, I needed to talk to everyone about. His voice trailed off as he registered the expressions on our faces. "About what, Connor?" I asked pleasantly. Connor's face went pale. "Natalie, I didn't expect. I thought you were working today. Change of plans. What did you need to talk to everyone about?" Connor looked at Brooklyn, clearly seeking some kind of guidance or support, but she was staring at her phone like it might offer her an escape route. "Maybe I should come back later." This seems like a bad time. Actually, I said, standing up and smoothing my yellow sundress. "This is a perfect time. We were just discussing some changes to next weekend's plans." "Changes? Well, for starters, I got married this morning." Connor's face went through the same cycle of emotions I'd been watching all afternoon. Confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally a kind of panicked calculation. "Married to who?" Derek. Matthews? My best friend Derek. My husband Derek, yeah." Connor sank into the nearest chair without invitation, his face ashen. "I don't understand. How is that possible?" "It's surprisingly easy actually. You go to the courthouse, fill out some paperwork, say some vows, exchange rings. Takes about an hour if you don't count the wait." "But why would you? We're supposed to get married next weekend." I looked at him sitting there in my mother's kitchen, the man I'd thought I loved for 3 years, and felt nothing but a mild curiosity about what I'd ever seen in him. He was handsome, successful, charming when he wanted to be, the kind of man who looked good on paper and even better at dinner parties. But sitting across from him now, I couldn't remember a single moment when he'd made me feel the way Derek did with just a smile. Connor, were we really supposed to get married next weekend? Something flickered behind his eyes, the look of a man who realized his carefully constructed story was about to collapse. Of course we were. I mean we are. We've been planning this for months. Funny thing about plans, I said conversationally. Sometimes they change. Sometimes you find out that the people you trust most have been making different plans behind your back. Connor's eyes darted to Brooklyn, who was still staring at her phone like it might spontaneously combust. Brooklyn, what's she talking about? The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of my mother crying upstairs. Brooklyn finally looked up from her phone, her face streaked with fresh tears. She knows, Connor. She knows about us. Connor's face crumpled like a house of cards in a windstorm. Natalie, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear how you explain 3 months of sleeping with my sister while planning a wedding with me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We were going to tell you. I was going to call off the wedding before. Before what? Before I found out. Before I embarrassed you by showing up at the altar. Before I wasted any more time thinking I was the problem in our relationship. Connor ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture I'd seen him make 1,000 times when work stress got the better of him. But this wasn't work stress. This was the consequences of his choices finally catching up with him. You have to understand, he said desperately. I do care about you, Natalie. I always have. But Brooklyn and I, what we have is different. It's what, Connor? It's real. The words hit exactly the way he'd intended them to, like a slap designed to make me question everything I'd ever believed about our relationship. 6 months ago they would have destroyed me. 6 hours ago they might have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and recrimination. But sitting there as Derek's wife, secure in the knowledge of what real love actually felt like, Connor's words bounced off me like pebbles thrown at a mountain. You're right, I said calmly. What you and Brooklyn have is real. Real betrayal. Real dishonesty. Real selfishness. That's not fair. What's not fair is letting me plan and pay for a wedding to a man who was in love with someone else. What's not fair is making me think I was the problem when the problem was that you didn't have the courage to be honest. Dad, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke up. Connor, I think you should leave. Mr. Harper, please, if I could just explain. You've explained enough. My daughter deserves better than this, and frankly so does my family. Connor stood up slowly, his eyes moving from Dad to me to Brooklyn, who was crying silently in the corner. Brooklyn, are you coming with me? The question hung in the air like a Brooklyn looked up at Connor, then at our father, then at me. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She'd gambled everything on Connor choosing her over me, and now she was realizing that his choice might not mean what she'd thought it would. I can't, she whispered. Dad said I have to leave, but I can't go with you, Connor. Not like this. Connor's face flushed red. So what was this all for then? What was the point of any of this if you're not even going to fight for? The point, I said quietly, was that you're both selfish people who wanted something that didn't belong to you. The difference is, Brooklyn at least feels guilty about it. Connor turned to look at me, and for a moment, I saw something ugly flash across his features. You think you're so perfect, don't you? So above it all, but you know what, Natalie? You were never passionate enough for me. You were never spontaneous or exciting or willing to let you treat me like garbage. You're right, I wasn't. Derek won't make you happy either. He's too quiet, too boring. He'll never be able to give you what you need. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in his presence for months. Derek already has given me what I need. Respect. Honesty. A partnership where I don't have to apologize for existing. Connor stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're different. I'm married to someone who loves me. It changes things. For a moment, Connor looked like he might say something else. Might make one last desperate attempt to salvage his position. Instead, he shook his head and walked toward the kitchen door. This isn't over, he said without turning around. Yes, it is, Dad replied firmly. And Connor, don't come back to this house. You're not welcome here anymore. We listened to Connor's footsteps echo through the hallway and out the front door. A moment later, his car engine started up and faded into the distance. The kitchen fell silent again, but this time it felt different, cleaner somehow, like a storm had finally passed and left clear skies behind. I should go pack, Brooklyn said quietly. Yes, you should, Dad replied. Brooklyn stood and walked toward the doorway, then paused and turned back to look at me. Natalie? Are you happy? Really happy? I thought about Derek waiting at home for my call, about the simple gold band on my finger, about the life we were going to build together based on honesty and mutual respect. Yes, I said. I really am. Brooklyn nodded once and disappeared upstairs. Dad and I sat in silence for several minutes, surrounded by the wreckage of our family's carefully constructed illusions. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? For not seeing what was happening. For not protecting you better. Dad, I'm 30 years. I don't need you to protect me anymore. Maybe not. But I should have seen that Brooklyn was capable of this kind of betrayal. I should have seen that Connor wasn't good enough for you. I reached across the table and took his hand. If you'd seen it, I might never have figured it out for myself. And I might never have realized what I really wanted. Derek's a good man, the best. Dad squeezed my hand. When do we get to officially meet our new son-in-law? How about tomorrow? I think Mom might need tonight to process everything. She'll come around. Your mother loves you both, even when she doesn't understand your choices. Even Brooklyn? Dad sighed heavily. Even Brooklyn? But it's going to take time. What she did, it changes things. I knew he was right. The family dynamics that had shaped our childhood, the assumption of trust and loyalty that had governed our relationships, all of that was gone now. We'd have to rebuild from the ground up, and there was no guarantee that Brooklyn would be part of whatever structure we created. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the future. I had Derek, I had my self-respect, and I had the knowledge that I'd handled the worst betrayal of my life with grace and strength. The rest would figure itself out in time. I should call Derek, I said, standing up and pulling out my phone. Let him know the family meeting went about as well as expected. Tell him we'd like to have dinner with him tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just a chance to welcome him properly to the family. I will, and Dad, thank you for believing me, for standing up for me. Thank you for being strong enough to stand up for yourself. As I walked outside to call my husband, I could hear Brooklyn moving around upstairs, presumably packing her things. By tomorrow she'd be gone, and our family would begin the long process of healing from the damage she'd caused. But tonight, I was going home to Derek, to the man who'd chosen me not out of convenience or settling, but because he genuinely believed I was worth choosing. That made all the rest of it bearable. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Derek's small apartment as I sat at his kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's yellow sundress, watching him make coffee with the same careful attention he brought to everything else in his life. His movements were precise, economical, and somehow deeply comforting. This was what normal looked like, I realized. This quiet domestic rhythm that didn't require drama or conflict or constant emotional management. Your mom called while you were in the shower, Derek said, setting a steaming mug in front of me. She wants to know if we're free for dinner tonight. She sounded tentative. That's Mom trying to process everything without admitting she doesn't know how to feel about any of it. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, inhaling the rich aroma of the dark roast Derek preferred. Even his coffee was better than Connor's, though that might have had more to do with the company than the beans. Are you ready for that? The official family introduction. I studied Derek's face as he settled into the chair across from me, noting the slight tension around his eyes. He was nervous, though he was trying to hide it. The thought that this strong, steady man was worried about making a good impression on my parents made something warm unfurl in my chest. Are you ready for it? I've been ready to be part of your family since the day I met you, he said simply. I just never thought it would happen like this. Neither of us had imagined our love story would begin with betrayal and deception, but perhaps that made it more solid somehow. We'd chosen each other not out of convenience or expectation, but because we'd seen each other at our most vulnerable and decided we wanted to build something together. My phone buzzed against the table, interrupting my thought. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Vanessa Rodriguez, our wedding planner. I have to take this, I told Derek, swiping to answer. Hi Vanessa. Natalie, thank goodness. Vanessa's voice carried the barely controlled panic of someone whose carefully orchestrated plans were imploding. I just got off the phone with the florist, and she's saying there might be some confusion about next weekend's arrangement. Something about canceled orders and changed contact information. I closed my eyes, remembering the methodical way I'd called each vendor yesterday evening after the family confrontation, canceling services and redirecting bills. I'd been so focused on preventing my parents from losing money on deposits that I'd forgotten to warn Vanessa about the changes. There's no confusion, Vanessa. The wedding is cancelled. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Cancelled? As in postponed, or cancelled, 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 cancelled. The engagement is over. Oh honey, I'm so sorry, I know this must be devastating for you. But we need to talk about the logistics. The deposits, the contracts, the vendors who've already prepared. Actually Vanessa, there's something else you should know. I got married yesterday. To someone else. Another silence, this one shorter but more profound. I'm sorry, did you say you got married? To someone who isn't Connor? That's right. Derek Matthews. We had a small ceremony at the courthouse in Lancaster. But the wedding is next weekend. Your dress is being pressed. The flowers are being arranged. The cake is… Vanessa's professional composure was cracking around the edge. I know this is complicated, and I'm sorry for the short notice. If you can email me a breakdown of what we'll lose on deposits versus what can be cancelled, I'll work with my parents to handle the financial aspects. Natalie, I have to ask, are you doing okay? This seems like a very sudden decision, and sometimes when people are under stress, they make choices they later regret. The concern in Vanessa's voice was genuine, and I appreciated, but it also reminded me how the outside world would likely view my actions, as an impulsive reaction to some unnamed crisis rather than a deliberate choice made from a position of strength. I'm doing better than I have in months, I said firmly. This wasn't a snap decision. It was the right decision. Okay, if you're sure, I'll start making calls and see what I can salvage. But Natalie, word is going to get out about this. Millbrook is a small town, and a cancelled wedding with a secret elopement. People are going to… After I ended the call, Derek reached across the table and took my hand. How bad is the vendor situation? Manageable. Expensive, but manageable. I intertwined our fingers, marveling at how perfectly his hand fit with mine. Vanessa's right though. By tonight everyone in town will know that I cancelled my wedding to Connor and married you instead. And how do you feel about that? I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, the thought of being the subject of town gossip would have sent me into a panic. The idea that people might be discussing my personal life over coffee at the diner or at the hair salon would have felt unbearable. But sitting here in Derek's kitchen, wearing his oversized t-shirt over my sundress, I found I didn't care what the people of Millbrook thought about my choice. I feel like it's none of their business, I said. And if they're talking about me, at least they're talking about the truth instead of whatever story Connor and Brooklyn were planning to spin. Derek smiled, the kind of slow, warm expression that had been making my heart skip for weeks. Miss Matthews, you continue to surprise me. Get used to it, Mr. Matthews. I'm just getting started. The sound of Derek's phone ringing interrupted our moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Marcus. I should probably take this. Marcus Thompson had been Derek's best friend since college. The kind of steady, reliable person who would make an excellent best man at a courthouse wedding, and an even better confidant when life got complicated. Hey Marcus. Derek answered, putting the call on speaker. What's up, dude? Please tell me you didn't actually marry Natalie Harper yesterday without telling anyone. Derek and I exchanged glances. If Marcus had heard about our marriage already, the news was spreading faster than Vanessa had predicted. Where did you hear that? Derek asked carefully. Connor showed up at my place at 2 in the morning, drunk off his ass and ranting about betrayal and stolen wives. I thought he was having some kind of breakdown, until I started putting the pieces together. Connor came to see you. He's been calling and texting since midnight. Something about how you stabbed him in the back and stole his fiancé. I figured there had to be more to the story, so I thought I'd go straight to the source. Derek looked at me, eyebrows raised in a silent question. I nodded. Marcus deserved the truth, especially if Connor was trying to paint Derek as the villain in this situation. It's true, Derek said. Natalie and I got married yesterday morning. Holy shit. Really? Marcus's voice carried surprise but not judgment. What about Connor? What about the wedding next weekend? Connor's been having an affair with Natalie's sister for 3 months. Natalie found out 2 weeks ago. We've been talking, realized we had feelings for each other, and decided to make it official. The silence on Marcus's end was thoughtful rather than shocked. That actually explains a lot. Connor's been acting weird for months, and whenever I tried to ask him about wedding stuff, he'd change the subject. He was planning to call off the wedding this week, I added. He just didn't plan on me beating him to it. Natalie, congratulations by the way. Derek's been crazy about you for years. Years? I looked at Derek, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Since the first time Connor brought you to one of our game nights, Marcus continued cheerfully, the man was gone from day one, though he was too much of a gentleman to do anything about it while you were with his friend. Marcus, Derek said warningly. What? It's true. I kept telling you to say something, but you insisted on being noble about it. The revelation sent a warm flutter through my chest. Derek had been interested in me for years, had watched me navigate an increasingly unhappy relationship while staying loyal to his friendship with Connor. The depth of his patience and integrity made me love him even more. Anyway, Marcus continued, I wanted to give you a heads up. Connor's pretty messed up about this whole thing, and he's not handling it well. He spent half the night talking about how he's going to prove that you manipulated Natalie somehow, that she couldn't possibly have made this decision on her own. Derek's jaw tightened. What kind of proof? I don't know, and honestly, I don't think he knows either. But he's not thinking clearly right now. He feels like everyone's against him, and he's looking for someone to blame besides himself. After we ended the call with Marcus, Derek and I sat in contemplative silence. The honeymoon phase of our secret marriage was officially over, replaced by the reality of dealing with the fallout from our choices. Are you worried? Derek asked. About Connor? Not really. What's he going to do? Tell people I chose to marry someone who actually loves. He could make things difficult, spread rumors, try to turn people against us. I thought about Connor's parting words yesterday, the ugly flash of anger when he realized he'd lost control of the situation. There had been something calculating in his expression, the look of someone already planning his next move. Let him try, I said. The truth has a way of coming out, and I'm not hiding from mine anymore. The rest of the morning passed peacefully. Derek worked on a logo design for a local restaurant while I fielded calls from various wedding vendors, systematically untangling the elaborate celebration that would never happen. Each conversation was easier than the last, as if I were shedding layers of someone else's expectations and emerging as myself. Around noon, my mother called. Natalie, sweetheart, I owe you an apology. I stepped onto Derek's small balcony, where the late spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwood from the courtyard below. For what, Mom? For my reaction yesterday. I was so shocked by everything that I couldn't see past my own disappointment to understand what you'd been going through. You don't need to apologize for being human. Yes, I do, because while I was worrying about canceled deposits and wasted planning, my daughter was dealing with betrayal from the two people she should have been able to trust most. I should have asked if you were okay instead of focusing on the wedding details. The genuine regret in Mom's voice made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. I'm okay, Mom. Better than okay, actually. Derek seems like a wonderful young man. Your father spent an hour on the phone with his mother this morning, and Eleanor Matthews couldn't stop singing his praises. You called Derek's parents? Your father called Eleanor. We've known each other for years through various community committees. She's thrilled about the marriage, by the way, though she's a little hurt that you didn't invite them to the ceremony. I winced, realizing that in my focus on handling my own family drama, I'd neglected Derek's parents entirely. We wanted something simple, just us, but we should have told them. She understands. She's just excited to officially welcome you to the family. We're all having dinner tonight, by the way. Nothing fancy, just the six of us getting to know each other properly. The thought of an intimate family dinner sent a flutter of nerves through my stomach. Meeting Derek's parents as his wife, rather than his friend's fiancé, would be a significant shift in dynamics, especially given the circumstances of our marriage. Mom, what about Brooklyn? Have you heard from her? The pause on my mother's end was long enough to be meaningful. She called this morning. She's staying with her friend Rachel for now, trying to figure out what to do next. And Connor? I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. That young man is no longer welcome in this family. The steel in Mom's voice was unmistakable. Patricia Harper might forgive her daughter's betrayal eventually, but she would never forgive Connor for manipulating both her daughters. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm proud of you for choosing happiness over expectation. It takes courage to change course when everyone's watching. After we hung up, I found Derek still working at his laptop, but I could see the tension in his shoulders that meant he'd been listening to my half of the conversation. Your parents want to meet me tonight, I said, settling onto his lap and wrapping my arms around his neck. They're going to love you. They already do, actually. Mom's been asking when I was going to do something about that sweet Harper girl for 2 years. Your mother knew you were interested in me. My mother knows everything. It's terrifying. Derek saved his work and closed the laptop, giving me his full attention. Are you nervous about tonight? A little. It's one thing to marry you at the courthouse when it's just us and two witnesses. It's another thing to face both sets of parents as a united front. We are a united front. Whatever comes next, we handle it together. The certainty in Derek's voice, the absolute faith that we could weather any storm as long as we faced it together, made me understand for the first time what real partnership felt like. With Connor, I'd always felt like I was managing his emotions while suppressing my own. With Derek, I felt like we were building something solid enough to last. The afternoon brought a steady stream of phone calls and text messages as news of our marriage spread through Millbrook's interconnected social network. Some were congratulatory, friends who had watched my relationship with Connor and suspected I wasn't truly happy. Others were carefully neutral, people fishing for gossip while maintaining plausible deniability. The most interesting call came from Dr. Patricia Wells, the veterinarian I worked for at the animal clinic. "Natalie, I'm calling to make sure you're planning to be at work on Monday," she said without preamble, "because I just had a very strange conversation with Connor Walsh, and I want to hear your side of things." My stomach dropped. "Connor called you. He seemed to think I should know that you've been having some kind of emotional breakdown. He suggested that your recent behavior might be affecting your job performance and that perhaps I should consider whether you're fit to continue working with animals." The audacity of it took my breath away. Connor had actually tried to get me fired, to undermine my professional reputation as some kind of revenge for choosing Derek over him. "Dr. Wells, I can explain everything. I'm sure you can, but frankly I don't need you to. I've worked with you for 3 years, Natalie. I know your character, your work ethic, and your competence. Some boy calling me up to spread gossip about your personal life says more about him than it does about you." The relief in my voice was audible. "Thank you for believing in me. Don't thank me yet." I told Connor that if he ever contacted my office again about anything that wasn't a legitimate veterinary emergency, I'd file a harassment complaint, but he seemed pretty determined to cause problems for you. After I hung up with Dr. Wells, I immediately called Derek and filled him in on Connor's attempt at sabotage. "He called your boss." Derek's voice was tight with anger. "He actually tried to get you fired." Dr. Wells shut him down, "But he's clearly not done trying to make my life difficult. This ends now. I'm calling him." "Derek, wait, let me handle this." "No, Natalie, I've been the understanding friend while he treated you badly. I've been the supportive shoulder while he ignored your needs. And I've been the patient gentleman while he cheated on you with your sister. But trying to destroy your career, that crosses a line." I could hear Derek moving around his apartment, probably looking for his car keys. The protective anger in his voice was both touching and concerning. "Where are you going?" "To have a conversation with Connor about boundaries and consequences." "Derek, please don't do anything that could make this worse." "Worse? He's trying to destroy your reputation and your livelihood because you didn't want to marry someone who was cheating on you. How exactly could this get worse?" He had a point, but I also knew that a confrontation between Derek and Connor would only escalate the situation. Connor was looking for ways to paint himself as the victim, and Derek as the villain. A physical altercation would play right into that narrative. "Give me 2 hours," I said. "Let me try to handle this my way first. If that doesn't work, then we'll figure out the next step together." Derek was quiet for a long moment. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to remind Connor that he's not the only one with secrets." I spent the next hour going through my phone, collecting screenshots of text messages, emails and social media posts that told the real story of Connor and Brooklyn's relationship. The evidence was all there, hidden in plain sight. Restaurant check-ins at places Connor claimed he'd gone alone, photos from events where Brooklyn appeared in the background, late-night texts that seemed innocent individually but formed a damning pattern when viewed together. By the time I finished compiling my digital evidence, I had a timeline that clearly showed the progression of their affair from emotional to physical. More importantly, I had proof that Connor had been planning to leave me weeks before I discovered their betrayal, making his current victim narrative completely unsustainable. Armed with screenshots and a renewed sense of purpose, I drove to Connor's apartment complex for what I hoped would be our final conversation. I found him sitting on his front steps, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his hair unwashed and his clothes wrinkled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Natalie?" He stood up when he saw me approaching, hope and weariness warring in his expression. "What are you doing here? We need to talk. Does Derek know you're here?" "This isn't about Derek. This is about you calling my boss and trying to sabotage my career." Connor's face flushed red. "I was worried about you. You've been acting erratically. making impulsive decisions. I thought your employer should know that you might be going through a difficult time. Cut the concerned ex-fiancé act, Connor. We both know why you're really doing this. Why am I doing it? I pulled out my phone and showed him the first screenshot, a photo from 3 months ago where he and Brooklyn were clearly together at a restaurant downtown. Because you're angry that I found out about your affair before you could control the narrative. Connor's face went pale as he recognized the image. Where did you get that? Brooklyn posted it on Instagram, hashtagged it as family dinner, which was clever. But if you look at the metadata, it was taken on a Tuesday night when you told me you had to work late. I swiped to the next image, a text exchange between Connor and Brooklyn about meeting at his apartment. This one's from 6 weeks ago. You were supposed to come to my cousin's wedding with me, remember? But you suddenly came down with the flu. Natalie, I can explain. I don't want your explanations, Connor. I want your guarantee that you'll stop trying to sabotage my life. Connor straightened, some of his usual arrogance reasserting itself. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm trying to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. By marrying Derek? By destroying your reputation over some rebound relationship. Natalie, you're not thinking clearly. Derek manipulated you when you were vulnerable. He took advantage of your emotional state to get something he's wanted for years. The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. Derek manipulated me? You mean by being honest with me? By treating me with respect? By not sleeping with my sister behind my back? He's been planning this, Natalie. Think about it. How convenient that he was there right when you needed a shoulder to cry on. How convenient that he had feelings for you just when your relationship with me hit a rough patch. I studied Connor's face, noting the desperate calculation behind his words. He genuinely seemed to believe his own narrative, that Derek was the manipulator and I was the helpless victim, who couldn't possibly make my own romantic decisions. You know what I think, Connor? I think you're panicked because your master plan fell apart. You thought you could have your cake and eat it too, keep me as the safe backup plan while you explored your feelings for Brooklyn. Then, when you were ready, you'd graciously break up with me and eventually end up with her, and everyone would think you were the good guy who tried to make it work. That's not what happened, isn't it? You've been pulling away from me for months, making me feel like I was the problem in our relationship. You were setting the stage for our breakup while simultaneously positioning Brooklyn as the consolation prize who helped you through your heartbreak. Connor's silence was answer enough. But then I went and married Derek before you could implement your exit strategy, and now you look like exactly what you are, a cheater who lost both women because he was too selfish to choose one. I did choose, Connor said quietly. I chose Brooklyn. No, you chose yourself. You chose the option that let you avoid responsibility and consequences. Brooklyn was just the means to that end. I put my phone back in my pocket and looked at Connor one last time. This man I'd thought I loved for 3 years, sitting there on his front steps. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own choices. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to stop calling my employer, my friends, my family, or anyone else in my life. You're going to stop spreading rumors about Derek manipulating me or me having some kind of breakdown. And you're going to accept that your relationship with Brooklyn is your problem to figure out, not mine. And if I smiled, feeling the strength that came from finally holding all the cards. Then I'll post every screenshot, every timeline, every piece of evidence I have about your affair on social media. The whole town will know exactly what kind of man you really are. Connor stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. He could continue his campaign of harassment and face public humiliation, or he could retreat gracefully and try to salvage his relationship with Brooklyn. Fine, he said finally. But don't come crying to me when Derek shows his true colors. I was already walking back to my car when I called over my shoulder. I won't have to. I finally know what true colors actually look like. By the time I got back to Derek's apartment, he was pacing the living room like a caged tiger. The moment I walked through the door, he pulled me into his arms. How did it go? He asked against my hair. Better than expected. I think Connor got the message. What message was that? I leaned back to meet his eyes. That I'm not the same woman who used to let him make me feel small. That I have evidence of everything he's done, and I'm not afraid to use it. And that his campaign of harassment ends now, or he'll face consequences he's not prepared for. Derek's smile was fierce with pride. That's my wife. Yes, I said, standing on my toes to kiss him. I am. As we got ready for dinner with both sets of parents, I felt a deep sense of completion settling over me. The confrontation with Connor had been the final piece of my transformation from victim to survivor to something even stronger. I wasn't just moving on from a bad relationship. I was stepping fully into the life I'd chosen for myself. Tonight, I would sit at a dinner table surrounded by people who loved and supported me, next to a man who saw me as an equal partner rather than a prize to be won. Tomorrow, I would go back to work at a job I loved, with a boss who valued my character over gossip. And next weekend, instead of walking down an aisle toward a marriage that would have made me miserable, I'd be starting my honeymoon with the love of my life. The future stretched ahead of us, bright with possibility and grounded in truth. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. The Riverside Manor stood gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight, its elegant stone facade and manicured gardens, looking exactly as they had when I'd first toured the venue 8 months ago. The same fountain bubbled peacefully in the circular drive. The same climbing roses adorned the pergola where I was supposed to have exchanged vows with Connor in 3 days. Everything looked perfect, untouched by the chaos that had consumed my life over the past week. I sat in my car in the parking lot, gathering courage for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Through the tall windows of the manor's main hall, I could see Vanessa Rodriguez directing a small army of staff members as they set up chairs and tested lighting for some other couple's dream wedding. The sight sent a pang through my chest, not of regret, but of something more complex. Relief, maybe mixed with sadness for the version of myself who had once thought this kind of elaborate celebration was what love looked like. Derek squeezed my hand from the passenger seat. "You sure you want to do this in person? We could handle everything over the phone." "No, I need to see it for myself. I need to close this chapter properly." The truth was, I'd been putting off this final vendor meeting for days, finding excuses to delay the inevitable conversation about deposits and cancellations, and all the practical remnants of a wedding that would never happen. But this morning, as Derek and I had coffee in our new shared apartment, I'd realized that avoiding the manor was giving it power over me. I was married to the man I loved, starting a life based on honesty and mutual respect, and yet I was still hiding from a building because it represented my past mistakes. That stopped today. Vanessa spotted us the moment we walked through the heavy oak doors, her professional smile faltering slightly when she recognized Derek beside me. She excused herself from the couple she'd been consulting with, and approached us with the careful grace of someone navigating emotional landmines. "Natalie, Derek," she said warmly, though I caught the question in her eyes. "I wasn't expecting to see you both here. We wanted to handle the final details in person," I said, "and I thought it was important for you to meet my husband officially." Vanessa's smile became genuine at that. "Congratulations to both of you. I have to say, I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts about couples. You two have something special." The comment surprised me. "You could tell, honey, I watched you and Connor together for months. You were polite, accommodating, focused on making everything perfect, but you never looked at him the way you're looking at Derek right now." I glanced at Derek, who was watching me with that steady, warm attention that still made my heart skip. "How am I looking at him?" "Like he's your favorite person in the world," Vanessa said simply. "Like you'd rather be talking to him than anyone else in any room. That's not something you can fake or force. It's either there or it isn't." Derek's hand found mine, and I felt that familiar sense of rightness, of being exactly where I belonged. "It's there," I said quietly. Vanessa led us to her office, a cozy space filled with photo albums and fabric samples and the accumulated dreams of hundreds of couples. She poured coffee from an elegant silver service while I gathered my thoughts. "So," she said, settling behind her desk with a leather-bound folder, "let's talk about Saturday." Saturday, the wedding that was supposed to happen in 3 days. The vendors, the timeline, the logistics. We have some decisions to make. I'd been so focused on the emotional fallout from Connor and Brooklyn's betrayal that I'd almost forgotten the practical reality of a canceled wedding. Flowers had been ordered, a cake had been baked, a string quartet had been hired to play during the ceremony. Dozens of people had carved time out of their schedules to create something beautiful, and now all of that effort would go to waste. "How bad is it?" Derek asked, reading my expression. Vanessa consulted her folder. "Honestly, it could be worse. The florist can redirect most of the arrangements to other events, if we give her 24 hours notice. The caterer has a cancellation policy, but you'll lose about 30% of your deposit. The string quartet can probably book another gig, though they'll keep their setup fee. And the venue is more complicated." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "You booked the premium package for Saturday, which includes exclusive use of the grounds from noon until midnight. Normally, we'd keep the entire deposit for a cancellation this close to the event date." My heart sank. The venue deposit alone had been $5,000, money my parents had saved for months to provide me with the wedding of my dream. "However," Vanessa continued, "there's been an interesting development." "What kind of development?" "Brooklyn called me yesterday." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Brooklyn called you." She wanted to know if it would be possible to move forward with Saturday's wedding, using the same arrangements, same vendors, same everything. but with her as the bride instead of you. I stared at Vanessa, trying to process what I was hearing. She wanted to steal my wedding. She said Connor had proposed to her and they wanted to honor the original date. She seemed to think that since you'd cancelled, the slot would automatically transfer to her. Derek made a sound that was half laugh, half growl. The audacity is breathtaking. What did you tell her? I told her that wedding contracts are non-transferable, and even if they were, the financial arrangements were made by you and your parents, not by her. I also told her that Connor Walsh was explicitly banned from this property after some concerning phone calls he'd made to various vendors. Connor's been calling vendors. Vanessa nodded grimly. He contacted the florist, the caterer and the string quartet, claiming there had been some misunderstanding about Saturday's event. He tried to convince them that you'd had some kind of breakdown and that he was taking over the planning to spare your family the embarrassment. The pattern was becoming clear. Connor wasn't just trying to sabotage my reputation. He was actively attempting to salvage his wedding plans with Brooklyn as a substitute bride. The calculation behind it was stunning in its selfishness. None of the vendors bought it, I assume. Not for a second. They've all worked with you directly for months. They know you're competent, organized, and completely rational. When some man they'd barely interacted with started spinning stories about mental health crises, they called me immediately. I felt a surge of gratitude for these near strangers who had protected my interests without being asked. I need to thank them. You can thank them by not letting Connor and Brooklyn hijack your wedding plans, Vanessa said firmly, which brings me to my proposal. Your proposal? Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that looked like mischief. What if we didn't cancel Saturday? What if we turned it into something else entirely? I don't understand. You're married, but you haven't had a celebration. Your family and friends missed out on witnessing your vows, on toasting your happiness, on being part of your love story. What if we converted Saturday from a wedding into a reception, a party to celebrate Mr. and Mrs. Matthews? The idea hit me like lightning. A celebration that was actually about Derek and me, about the love we'd chosen and the life we were building together. Not a performance for other people's expectations, but a genuine expression of joy shared with the people who mattered most. Is that even possible, Derek? More than possible. The venue is already booked. The vendors are already scheduled. We'd need to modify some details, obviously, change the ceremony space into additional reception seating, adjust the timeline, update the signage, but the bones of a beautiful party are already in place. I looked at Derek, seeing my own excitement reflected in his expression. What do you think? I think it sounds perfect. But are you sure? After everything that's happened with Connor and Brooklyn, do you really want to celebrate here? I considered the question seriously. This place had once represented my misguided attempt to build a life with the wrong person, but it didn't have to carry that weight forever. If Derek and I could reclaim Saturday as our own celebration, we'd be transforming something painful into something joyful. I think taking back this day would be the perfect way to move forward, I said. Vanessa clapped her hands together. Excellent. We have 3 days to pull this off, which is tight but manageable. The first question is guest list. Who do we invite to this celebration? I thought about the original wedding guest list. 200 people representing 3 years of Connor's social and professional connections mixed with my own family and friends. Half of those people barely knew me, had been invited out of obligation or social expectation rather than genuine affection. Smaller, I said immediately. Much smaller, just family and close friends. People who actually care about us, not people who feel obligated to attend. How small are we talking? Maybe 30 people, 40 at the most? Vanessa made notes on her pad. That works beautifully actually. We can set up everything in the garden pavilion instead of the main hall. More intimate, more personal. Over the next hour, we worked through the logistics with the efficiency of people who had a clear vision and limited time. The string quartet would play during cocktails and dinner rather than for a processional that wouldn't happen. The elaborate cake would be replaced with something simpler but more suited to Derek's and my actual tastes. The floral arrangements would be scaled back but repositioned to create a warm, welcoming atmosphere for an evening celebration. What about your dress, Vanessa? Do you want to wear it for the reception? I thought about the ivory silk gown hanging in my childhood bedroom closet, the one Brooklyn had been wearing when I discovered the full extent of her betrayal. The dress was beautiful, had been chosen with care and love, but it belonged to a different version of myself. No, I said. I want something new, something that's just mine. There's a boutique in Lancaster that specializes in non-traditional bridal wear. Cocktail dresses, evening gowns, things that would be perfect for a reception celebration. I can make some calls if you'd like. As we wrapped up our planning session, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Instead of dwelling on the wedding that wouldn't happen, We were creating something better, a celebration that actually reflected who Derek and I were as a couple. One last question, Vanessa said as we gathered our things. Have you given any thought to what you'll say if Connor or Brooklyn show up on Saturday? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but now that she'd raised it, I realized it was entirely likely. Connor's attempts to salvage the wedding plans suggested he wasn't ready to let go of Saturday's date, and Brooklyn had already proven she was willing to cross any boundary to get what she wanted. Do you think they I think Connor is desperate enough to try anything, and Brooklyn seems to believe she's entitled to step into your life. It's worth having a plan. Derek's expression had gone hard. If they show up, I'll handle it. We'll handle it, I corrected. Together, the drive home gave Derek and me time to process everything we just committed to. In 3 days, we'd be hosting a celebration of our marriage for the people who mattered most to us. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Are we crazy? I asked as we pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex. Probably, but it's the good kind of crazy. That evening, we started making calls. Derek reached out to Marcus and a few other close friends while I called my parents, Grace, and the handful of people I genuinely wanted to share this moment with. Each conversation was a small joy, hearing the excitement and love in voices of people who truly cared about our happiness. My mother's reaction was the most rewarding. A reception party, Natalie, that's brilliant. It's exactly what you and Derek deserve, a celebration that's actually about you two instead of some elaborate production. You're not disappointed about missing the big wedding. Sweetheart, I'm thrilled that you're happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Grace was equally enthusiastic when I called her. This is so much better than that stuffy formal wedding you were planning. She said, remember how stressed you were about the seating chart and the menu and all those people you didn't even like? This sounds like actually fun. Will you come? I know it's short notice. Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss it. I've been waiting 3 years for you to marry someone who deserves you. By Thursday evening, we had confirmations from 28 people, a perfect intimate group for celebrating in the garden pavilion. Derek's parents were driving down from Pittsburgh. My extended family was rearranging weekend plans, and Marcus had volunteered to serve as unofficial coordinator for Derek's friends. The only person we hadn't heard from was Brooklyn. My parents had called her, extending an invitation with the careful neutrality of people trying to navigate a family crisis. She'd asked for time to think about it, which everyone understood meant she was trying to figure out whether attending would help or hurt her position in the family. Do you want her there? Derek asked as we went over final details on Friday morning. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants her to see that her betrayal didn't destroy me, that I'm happier than I ever would have been with Connor. But part of me just wants one day that isn't about managing her drama. It's your choice, our choice. We don't owe anyone anything on this. That afternoon brought an unexpected visit. I was picking up my new dress from the boutique in Lancaster, a flowing emerald green silk that made me feel elegant and confident, when I returned home to find Brooklyn sitting on the steps of our apartment building. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was limp and unwashed, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. But it was her expression that caught me off guard, not the defiant self-righteousness I'd expected, but something that looked almost like genuine remorse. Natalie, she said, standing as I approached. Can we talk? I glanced up at our apartment windows, where I could see Derek moving around in the kitchen. He'd spotted Brooklyn from upstairs and was probably debating whether to come down and intervene. What do you want, Brooklyn? I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry because everyone expects me to. I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but there was something different about her today, a kind of exhausted honesty that I hadn't seen since we were children. Okay, I said. Brooklyn took a shaky breath. I've been staying with Rachel, trying to figure out how everything went so wrong so fast. And Connor's been calling me non-stop, trying to convince me that we can still make this work somehow. That we can still have the wedding, still have the life we planned. What did you tell him? I told him I couldn't do it. I couldn't steal your wedding day, couldn't pretend that what we did was romantic instead of horrible. Tears started sliding down Brooklyn's cheek. I told him I was done being the kind of person who hurts her sister for a man. The words hit me with unexpected force. I'd been prepared for more manipulation, more attempts to justify her betrayal. I hadn't been prepared for what sounded like genuine accountability. How did Connor take that? Not well. He said I was being manipulated by you and Derek, that I was throwing away our chance at happiness because of guilt. When I wouldn't change my mind, Brooklyn's voice broke completely. What? He told me I was just a consolation prize anyway, that he'd chosen you first because you were more stable, more suitable, but that I was more fun in bed. He said if I wasn't going to help him salvage the situation, I was worthless to him. The cruelty of Connor's words made me feel physically sick. Whatever Brooklyn had done to me, she didn't deserve to be reduced to a sexual convenience and then discarded when she was no longer useful. I'm sorry he said that to you. Are you? Really? I considered the question honestly. Yeah, you made terrible choices, Brooklyn, and you hurt me in ways that are going to take time to forgive. But you're still my sister, and Connor's cruelty to you doesn't make me happy. Brooklyn nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I know you probably don't believe this, but I never meant for it to go as far as it did. It started as just talking, just being there for him when he was having doubts about the wedding. I told myself I was helping both of you by listening to his concerns. When did it become more than talking? The night after your engagement party, Connor was so quiet during the whole celebration, and afterward he said he felt like he was suffocating. We went for coffee to talk about it, and he kissed me in the parking lot. I remembered that night. Connor had been distant and distracted during the party, barely participating in the toasts or the gift opening. I'd attributed it to work stress and too much champagne, never imagining that my sister was the real cause of his mood. I should have stopped it then, Brooklyn continued. I should have told him to figure out his feelings before doing anything that would hurt you. But I'd been in love with him for so long, and suddenly he was choosing me, and I let myself believe it was meant to be. You've been in love with him for years? Since college? Since the first time you brought him home for dinner and he helped Mom with the dishes afterward. But he chose you, and you were so happy, so I buried those feelings and tried to be supportive. The revelation recontextualized years of family dinners and holiday celebrations. All those times Brooklyn had gone out of her way to be kind to Connor, all her enthusiasm for our relationship milestones, all her encouragement about marriage and children. She'd been performing the role of supportive sister while quietly nursing her own heartbreak. It didn't excuse her betrayal, but it helped explain it. Brooklyn, why are you telling me this now? Because tomorrow you're going to celebrate your marriage to someone who actually loves you, and I wanted you to know that I understand what I threw away. Not just my relationship with you, but the chance to be part of something real and good. What do you mean? Brooklyn smiled sadly. Derek loves you the way Connor never did. The way Connor was never capable of loving anyone. I spent 3 months with Connor, and he never looked at me the way Derek looks at you. He never talked about me the way Derek talks about you. I thought I was winning some great prize, but I was just getting the consolation version of something you never wanted anyway. The insight was more perceptive than I'd expected from Brooklyn, and it made me realize that her punishment had been its own kind of justice. She'd gotten exactly what she'd schemed for, only to discover it wasn't worth having. Are you coming tomorrow? I asked. Do you want me there? I thought about it seriously. Brooklyn had betrayed me in the worst possible way, had been willing to let me walk down the aisle to marry a man who was in love with her. But she was also the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who had cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart, the sister who had taught me how to braid my hair and had been my partner in countless childhood adventures. I want you to come, I said finally, but I need you to understand that showing up doesn't erase what happened. We have a long way to go before we're okay again. I know, but I want to start trying to earn your forgiveness. If you'll let me. What about Connor? Are you going to warn him to stay away? Brooklyn's expression hardened. Connor made his choice when he tried to manipulate me into stealing your wedding. He's not my problem anymore. As Brooklyn walked away toward her car, I felt a complex mix of emotions settling over me. I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, might not be ready for months or even years. But seeing her take responsibility for her choices, seeing her finally understand the difference between love and manipulation, felt like the beginning of something that might eventually heal. Derek appeared beside me on the sidewalk, having come down from our apartment while I was lost in thought. Everything okay? He asked, slipping his arm around my waist. Yeah, I said, leaning into his warmth. I think it might actually be okay. She's coming tomorrow? She's coming tomorrow? As my sister, not as Connor's co-conspirator, Derek nodded thoughtfully. And if Connor shows up? I looked up at the man I'd married, the man who had waited patiently for me to find my way to him, who had supported me through the worst betrayal of my life without ever making it about himself. If Connor shows up, he'll see exactly what he lost and exactly what I gained, and then security will escort him off the property. Derek's laugh was warm and proud. Mrs. Matthews, you continue to amaze me. Good, I said, standing on my toes to kiss. I plan to keep doing that for the next 50 years. Tomorrow we would celebrate our marriage surrounded by people who loved us, in a place that had been transformed from a symbol of my past mistakes into a representation of our shared future. It wouldn't be the wedding I'd originally planned, but it would be something better, a celebration that was authentically ours. And if Connor Walsh thought he could disrupt our happiness one more time, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. The morning of our celebration dawned crisp and golden, the kind of perfect May day that made everything look like it had been painted with extra care. I woke up in Derek's arms in our apartment, sunlight streaming through the gauzy curtains we'd hung together the week before, and for the first time in months I felt completely at peace. Today wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about showing the world that I'd moved on or demonstrating that Connor's betrayal hadn't broken me. Today was simply about joy, about celebrating the love Derek and I had found in the midst of chaos, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about our happiness. Derek stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist as consciousness slowly returned. "Good morning, Mrs. Matthews," he murmured against my neck, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews. Ready for our party?" "I've been ready since the day I met you." We took our time getting ready, sharing coffee on our tiny balcony while we watched the town wake up below us. There was something deeply satisfying about starting this day in our own space, in the life we'd built together rather than in the chaos of family homes and other people's expectations. Around 10, Grace arrived with her arms full of flowers and a grin that could have powered the entire town. "Emergency bridesmaid reporting for duty," she announced, bustling into our kitchen with the kind of organizational energy that had made her invaluable during every crisis of my adult life. "I've got your bouquet, Derek's boutonniere, and enough backup flowers to decorate a small country if needed." The bouquet was perfect, white peonies mixed with eucalyptus, and trailing ribbon in the same emerald green as my dress. It was elegant but not fussy, romantic but not overly sentimental, everything my original bridal bouquet hadn't been. "Grace, this is beautiful," I said, inhaling the soft fragrance. "Better than those ridiculous calla lilies you originally picked," she said with characteristic bluntness. "Those were Connor's choice anyway, weren't they?" She was right, though I hadn't fully realized it at the time. Connor had strong opinions about wedding flowers, insisting that calla lilies were more sophisticated than peonies, more suitable for the kind of elegant celebration he envisioned. Looking back, I could see how many of my wedding choices had been influenced by his preferences rather than my own. "How are you feeling?" Grace asked, pinning Derek's boutonniere with practiced efficiency. "Any nerves?" "Surprisingly no. I thought I'd be anxious about seeing everyone, about the possibility that Connor might show up, but I just feel excited. That's because this time you're celebrating something real instead of performing something fake." Derek emerged from the bedroom wearing a navy suit that brought out the green in his eyes, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine but still completely himself. The sight of him, my husband, dressed up to celebrate our marriage with the people we loved most, sent a flutter of pure happiness through my chest. "How do I look?" he asked, adjusting his tie with the careful attention of a man who didn't usually wear formal clothing but wanted to get it right for this occasion. "Like the man I want to spend the rest of my life with," I said, earning a warm smile that made my heart skip. We arrived at the Riverside Manor at 3 o'clock, 2 hours before our guests were due to arrive. The transformation Vanessa and her team had worked was stunning. The garden pavilion had been draped with flowing white fabric and strung with lights that would create a magical atmosphere as the sun set. Round tables were arranged in a horseshoe pattern around a small dance floor, each one adorned with simple but elegant centerpieces of white flowers and flickering candles. "It's perfect," Derek said, his arm around my waist as we surveyed the scene. "It's ours," I corrected, and that felt like the most important distinction in the world. Vanessa appeared at my elbow, clipboard in hand but looking relaxed in a way I'd never seen during our original wedding planning session. "The caterer is setting up in the kitchen, the string quartet is warming up in the side garden, and I've briefed security about potential uninvited guests," she said efficiently. "Everything is on schedule. Security, just a precaution. 2 discreet gentlemen who will keep an eye on the entrance and handle any disruptions with minimal fuss. Better to be prepared than surprised." I felt Derek tense slightly beside me. "Do you really think Connor will try something?" "I think Connor Walsh is a man who doesn't handle rejection well, and today represents the final nail in the coffin of his plans. Better safe than sorry." The first guests began arriving at 5, and the evening took on a dreamlike quality that made everything feel both surreal and perfectly natural. Derek's parents, warm and welcoming people who had clearly raised their son with love and strong values, embraced me like I'd always been part of their family. My mother, elegant in navy blue silk, moved between guests with the grace of a woman in her element, finally able to enjoy a family celebration instead of managing a crisis. Marcus arrived with a small group of Derek's college friends, men who had watched their quiet, loyal friend carry a torch for an unavailable woman for years and were clearly thrilled to see him finally happy. They folded me into their group with the easy acceptance of people who trusted Derek's judgment completely. My father, usually reserved at social gatherings, was in his element talking with Derek's father about everything from local politics to fishing techniques. The two men had discovered a mutual love of both subjects, and were well on their way to becoming genuine friends. But it was the moment Brooklyn arrived that really defined the evening for me. She came alone, wearing a simple black dress that was appropriate without being dramatic, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. She hesitated at the edge of the pavilion, clearly uncertain of her welcome, until my mother spotted her and immediately went over to offer a hug. The gesture was small but significant. Mom's embrace said what words couldn't, that Brooklyn was still family, still loved, but that there would be consequences and rebuilding required. It was exactly the kind of nuanced response I'd hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. Brooklyn made her way over to Derek and me, her expression nervous but determined. "Natalie, Derek, thank you for inviting me. I know I don't deserve to be here. You're here because I want you here," I said simply. "Because despite everything, you're still my sister." Brooklyn's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back and managed a genuine smile. "You look beautiful, happy, really happy. I am really happy, Derek. I owe you an apology too. I said some terrible things about you and Natalie, things I knew weren't true. I was trying to make myself feel better about what I'd done, and that wasn't fair to either of you." Derek's response was gracious but measured. "I appreciate that, Brooklyn. Natalie's forgiveness means everything to me, and if she's ready to work on rebuilding your relationship, then I support that completely." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the string quartet, whose first notes signaled the official beginning of our celebration. As guests mingled and laughter filled the garden air, I felt myself relaxing into the kind of joy I'd never experienced at any of my original wedding events. This was what celebration felt like when it was authentic. No stress about seating charts or whether distant relatives would approve of the menu. No anxiety about living up to other people's expectations or performing the role of the perfect bride. Just pure happiness shared with people who genuinely cared about our well-being. Derek and I were talking with his college friends, when one of the security guards Vanessa had hired approached discreetly. "Mrs. Matthews, I need to let you know that Connor Walsh just pulled into the parking lot. He's sitting in his car, appears to be on the phone. Should I approach him?" The news sent a ripple of tension through our small group, but I found I wasn't afraid. If anything, I felt a kind of calm resolution settling over me. I'd been expecting this moment, and I was ready for it. "No, don't approach him yet. Let me know if he gets out of the car or tries to come onto the property." "What do you want to do?" Derek asked quietly. "I want to enjoy our party. If Connor wants to sit in the parking lot and torture himself by watching us celebrate, that's his but he doesn't get to disrupt our happiness." The guard nodded and melted back into the background, while our friends formed a protective circle without being asked. It was a subtle but powerful reminder that I wasn't facing this situation alone anymore. 20 minutes later, the guard returned. "He's gotten out of the car and is walking toward the entrance. Should I stop him?" I looked around at the celebration in full swing, at Derek's parents laughing with mine, at Brooklyn helping serve drinks with the careful attention of someone trying to earn her place back in the family, at Grace dancing with Marcus to the string quartet's rendition of The Way You Look Tonight. "Let him come," I said, "but stay close." Connor appeared at the edge of the pavilion, looking like a man who had spent the week unraveling. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his hair unkempt and his clothes wrinkled, but it was his expression that caught my attention, not the calculated manipulation I'd expected, but something that looked almost like desperation. He stood at the entrance for a long moment, taking in the scene before him. The elegant celebration that should have been his wedding, transformed into something completely different. The woman who should have been his bride, radiant in emerald green instead of white silk, dancing with the man who had quietly loved her for years. Several conversations stopped as people noticed Connor's arrival, but I held up a hand to keep anyone from approaching him. This was my moment to handle, my final confrontation to navigate on my own terms. I walked over to Connor calmly, Derek falling into step beside me with the quiet confidence of a man who trusted his wife to handle whatever came next. "Connor," I said when I reached him, "what are you doing here?" Up close, he looked even worse than I'd initially realized. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly, and there was a smell of alcohol on his breath that suggested he'd been drinking for courage. "This should have been our wedding," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This venue, these flowers, this music, We planned all of this together. No, Connor, you planned all of this for us. I planned it for the person I thought you were, for the marriage I thought we were going to have, but none of it was real. It could have been real, it should have been real. Based on what? Based on you sleeping with my sister for 3 months. Based on you lying to me about your feelings. Based on you trying to sabotage my career when I didn't react to your betrayal the way you wanted. Connor's face twisted with something that might have been shame or might have been anger. That's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? I was trying to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. His gesture encompassed Derek, the celebration, everything we'd built together. This isn't real, Natalie. This is a rebound, a reaction to being hurt. Derek manipulated you when you were vulnerable. The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that several of our guests actually laughed. But I didn't laugh. I looked at Connor with something approaching pity, seeing clearly for the first time how small and scared he really was underneath all his bravado. Connor, do you hear yourself? You're standing at my marriage celebration, drunk and disheveled, telling me that my husband manipulated me into marrying him. Do you realize how that sounds? I know how it sounds, but you know what manipulation actually looks like. I interrupt. Manipulation looks like letting someone plan and pay for a wedding, while you conduct a secret affair. Manipulation looks like making someone feel like they're crazy for questioning obvious laws. Manipulation looks like trying to get someone fired from their job as revenge for not staying with you after you betrayed them. Each statement hit Connor like a physical blow, and I watched him realize that his attempt at reframing the narrative had failed completely. Everyone here knew the truth, knew what he'd done, and no amount of projection or gaslighting was going to change that. What do you want, Connor? Derek asked, his voice calm but firm. Because you're disrupting our celebration, and I need you to either explain why you're here or leave. Connor turned to Derek with something approaching hatred. I want you to admit that you planned this, that you saw an opportunity to take something that was mine and you seized it. Natalie was never yours. She was a person making her own choices, and she chose to leave you because of your actions, not because of anything I did. She chose you because you were convenient, because you were there when she was hurting. I chose Derek, I said clearly, loud enough for everyone at the celebration to hear, because he treats me like an equal partner instead of a prize to be won, because he listens to me instead of talking over me, because he supports my dreams instead of reshaping them to fit his preference, because he's honest with me even when the truth is difficult. The words carried across the pavilion, and I saw my parents nodding approvingly, saw Derek's friends exchanging satisfied glances, saw Brooklyn wiping away tears. Most importantly, I continued, I chose Derek because he chose me, not as a backup plan, not as a consolation prize, not as someone to fill time while he figured out what he really wanted. He chose me because he loves me, and he's never made me doubt that for a single day. Connor stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him cycling through his options, realizing that none of them would give him what he wanted. He couldn't argue with the truth, couldn't manipulate people who had witnessed his behavior firsthand, couldn't rewrite history to make himself the victim. This isn't over, he said finally, the threat hollow and desperate. Yes, it is, I replied firmly. It's been over since the moment you chose to betray me instead of being honest about your feelings. It's been over since the moment you decided my sister was worth more than my trust. It's been over since the moment you tried to sabotage my life because I wouldn't let you control the narrative. The security guard appeared at Connor's elbow, professional but unmistakably present. Sir, I need to ask you to leave the premises. This is a private event. Connor looked around the pavilion one last time, taking in the celebration that should have been his wedding, the woman who should have been his bride, the life he'd lost through his own choices. You'll regret this, he said to me, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. The only thing I regret, I said, is wasting 3 years of my life on someone who never deserved them. Connor left without another word, escorted by security to his car. As we watched him drive away, Derek slipped his arm around my waist. How do you feel? He asked. I considered the question seriously. How did I feel, watching the man I'd once thought I loved disappear from my life forever? Free, I said finally. I feel completely free. The celebration resumed with renewed energy, as if Connor's departure had lifted a weight from everyone's shoulder. The string quartet played with extra enthusiasm, conversations became more animated, and laughter came more easily. It was as if his presence had been a storm cloud that had finally moved on, leaving clear skies behind. As the sun began to set, Derek and I took a moment to step away from our guests and walk to the edge of the garden, where a small stone bridge crossed over a meandering stream. No regrets? Derek asked, taking both my hands in his. None, only that it took us so long to get here. We got here exactly when we were supposed to, I said. I needed to learn what I didn't want before I could fully appreciate what I did want. Derek smiled, the expression soft and warm in the golden light of sunset. And what do you want, Mrs. Matthews? This, all of this. A marriage based on honesty and respect and genuine partnership. A life where I don't have to apologize for being myself or pretend to be someone I'm not to keep the peace. Children someday who grow up seeing what real love looks like. That sounds perfect to me. We stood there for several minutes, watching the water flow beneath the bridge while the sounds of our celebration drifted across the garden. In the distance I could see our families and friends mingling easily, Brooklyn helping my mother coordinate the dinner service, Derek's father deep in conversation with Marcus about something that was making them both laugh. Natalie. Brooklyn's voice came from behind us, tentative but determined. We turned to find my sister standing at the end of the bridge, looking like she wanted to say something important, but wasn't sure how to begin. Can I talk to you for a minute, both of you? Derek squeezed my hand. I'll give you two some space. No, stay. This involves both of you. Brooklyn walked onto the bridge, her expression serious but not defensive. I want to say something, and I need to say it properly. Okay, I've spent the last week thinking about what I did, not just to you but to myself. And I realized that I didn't just betray your trust. I betrayed everything I was raised to believe about family and loyalty and being a good person. She took a shaky breath before continuing. But watching you tonight, seeing how happy you are, seeing how Derek looks at you and how you look at him, I understand something I didn't before. What Connor and I had wasn't love. It was just mutual selfishness, dressed up in romantic language. What do you mean? I mean that real love, the kind you two have, doesn't require betrayal or deception or hurting other people. Real love makes you want to be better, not worse. It makes you want to build things up, not tear them down. Brooklyn turned to Derek, her expression earnest. Derek, I'm sorry for trying to undermine your relationship with Natalie. I'm sorry for suggesting that you manipulated her or took advantage of her situation. I knew even when I was saying those things that they weren't true. I appreciate that, Brooklyn. And Natalie, she continued, turning back to me, I'm sorry for betraying your trust in the worst possible way. I'm sorry for letting you plan a wedding to someone who was lying to you. I'm sorry for putting my own wants ahead of your well-being. I'm sorry for being the kind of sister who would hurt you instead of protecting you. The apology was everything I'd wanted to hear, and hadn't dared to hope for. Not excuses or justifications, but genuine accountability and understanding of the harm she'd caused. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. I'm not ready to forget, and I'm not ready to trust you completely again, but I forgive you. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what family does. We forgive each other and we try to do better. Brooklyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. I want to do better. I want to be the kind of sister you can trust again, even if it takes years. It might take years, I agreed, but I'm willing to try if you are. As Brooklyn walked back toward the celebration, Derek and I remained on the bridge, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Are you really okay with that? Derek asked. Forgiving her? I'm okay with choosing forgiveness over resentment. I'm okay with believing that people can change and grow, and become better than their worst moments, even after everything she did. Especially after everything she did, because holding on to anger about her choices would give those choices power over my future, and I refused to let that happen. Derek pulled me closer, and I marveled again at how perfectly I fit against his side, how natural it felt to lean into his strength and warmth. I love you, Natalie Matthews. I love you too, Derek Matthews. We rejoined our celebration as the garden lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, transforming the pavilion into something magical and ethereal. The evening continued with dinner and dancing, and toasts that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Marcus gave a speech about friendship and loyalty and waiting for the right person instead of settling for the convenient one. My father talked about watching his daughter find her strength and choose happiness over expectation. Grace raised her glass to second chances and new beginnings and the courage to change course when life isn't working. But it was my mother's toast that moved me most. To Natalie and Derek, she said, her voice clear and strong, who remind us all that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Derek and I found ourselves alone in the pavilion for a few minutes, swaying to music only we could hear while the cleanup crew worked discreetly around us. So, Miss Matthews, Derek said, spinning me slowly under the twinkling lights, how does it feel to be married? Like coming home, I said without hesitation. Like everything that came before was just preparation for this. No second thoughts about the dramatic way we got here. I thought about the question seriously, considering the path that had brought us to this moment, the betrayal that had shattered my illusions, the courage it had taken to choose myself over other people's expectations, the leap of faith required to trust love again after being so badly burned. No second thoughts, I said firmly, because all of it, the good and the bad and the messy and the complicated, led us here, led us to each other, led us to this. Derek's smile was radiant. Here's to this then, here's to us, here's to us. As we danced in the garden pavilion of the Riverside Manor, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been my wedding to another man, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for Derek's patient love, for my family's support, for friends who had celebrated our joy without judgment, for the strength I'd found to choose authenticity over convenience. Most of all, I felt gratitude for the betrayal that had freed me from a life that would have made me miserable, that had forced me to confront what I really wanted instead of what I thought I should want. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, but only if you're brave enough to let it transform you instead of destroy you. Tonight, surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of a future built on honesty and mutual respect, I understood that truth more clearly than ever before. Derek and I left the Riverside Manor that night as husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word, ready to build a life that belonged entirely to us. Behind us, the pavilion stood empty but somehow still glowing with the warmth of authentic celebration. Ahead of us stretched years of ordinary days and extraordinary moments, of challenges met together and joys shared completely. As Derek drove us home to the apartment we shared, to the life we were creating one honest conversation and small kindness at a time, I realized that I had never been happier to be exactly where I was, exactly who I was, exactly when I was supposed to be there. The girl who had worn my wedding dress, without permission, was welcome to whatever life she could build with the man who had betrayed us both. I had something better, a partner who had chosen me, not as a consolation prize or a convenient option, but as his first choice, his only choice, his forever choice, and that made all the difference in the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.